Hello guys, welcome back to ENVISION Academy. Today's story is The Poet and the Jester. Today's story is actually the continuation of the previous story, The Boy with an Answer. So, today we'll be knowing what was Raman's fate, what happened to Raman in his later years. So, let us start with the story. Raman grew up and became a famous poet. His friends often told him to go to the king, Krishnadeva Raya, and to seek a job at the court. The king would pay him well and look after him, because in his court there were many wise men and skillful people, and they were all looked after well. Raman, or Tenali Raman as he was now called, thought that this was an excellent idea. However, he did not know how he could get into the court of the king. Then one day a man called Thatachari, who was very close to the king, came to a place near Tenali. Raman's friends told him about this man. "Go and see him," they urged. "He will surely be of some help." Raman hurriedly to the nearby village and found Thatachari. He begged for an audience with him. And when Thatachari heard it was the famous poet, he readily agreed to see Tenali Raman. Raman came before Thatachari and was carefully to be polite. He did not want to upset the man with his jokes or sharp comments. Instead, he read out some of his poems. Thatachari was most impressed. "What a fine way you have with words, young man," he said. "They are fine poems. You must come along and read them to the king." Raman thanked Thatachari most gratefully. "Yes, indeed," continued Thatachari, and then added rather grandly, and much to Raman's disappointment, "I shall try and remember to send for you one of these days." Raman returned to Tenali. He hoped that Thatachari would remember to call him, but the weeks rolled on. Still, there was no news from Thatachari. Raman became impatient. One day he packed up his poems and personal belongings and, along with his family, set off for Vijayanagaram, the capital. The very day he arrived in Vijayanagaram, Raman went to Thatachari's grand house. It was surrounded by gardens and a huge wall. There were guards at the gate, but the walls and the guards did not stop Raman. He marched straight into the grounds. When the guards tried to stop him, he brushed them aside. "How dare you lay your hands on me?" he complained. "Do you know who I am? An old friend." The guards were taken aback and allowed Raman to enter the house. They did not think to ask, "Whose old friend are you?" Once inside, Raman found his way to where Thatachari was sitting. The great man was relaxing after his breakfast. He was surprised and annoyed to see this uninvited visitor to his house. "Who are you? What on earth are you doing here?" he spluttered. "I am Raman, Tenali Raman. You remember? You told me to come and—" But the great man did not let Raman finish. "Guards! Guards!" yelled Thatachari. "Get this man out of here!" And the guards, who had followed Raman into the house but had kept their distance, pounced on him and pinned him to the floor. "Tenali Raman, indeed. This is Vijayanagaram, not Tenali," said Thatachari, as the guards bundled poor Raman out onto the street. Raman sat in the street feeling very sore. He made up his mind to get even with the king's friends. The following day, after Raman had time to think and to nurse his hurt limbs and his pride, he made his way to the king's court. Many common citizens were going to be at the court that day, as the king had arranged for a famous magician from the north to entertain his people. Raman slipped unnoticed into the court with all the others. The king and all the ministers and other important guests sat close to the stage. The magician, dressed in a long flowing robe and wearing a turban decorated with stars and a bright yellow moon, suddenly appeared on the stage in a cloud of blue smoke. The king clapped and applauded, as did the ministers and guests. The common folk, standing apart, shouted and whistled and cheered. Raman edged closer to the stage and to the king. He was also getting closer to Tatachari, who was sitting right next to the king. The magician was superb. He performed trick after trick that amazed and greatly entertained the audience. After the last and most difficult trick in the program, one in which the magician appeared to remove his head and hold it aloft in his outstretched hand, the crowd went wild with delight. The applause in the hall rattled the rooftop like thunder. Then, as silence slowly returned, the magician turned to the king and announced, "Your Majesty, I hope you have enjoyed my performance. With your permission, I would like to challenge anyone in your court to equal the feats I have performed today." "You have my permission," said the king, and he turned to see whether anybody would take up the challenge. No hands were raised, and no voices were heard. The king was ashamed that there was no one brave enough to take up the challenge. Tatachari and the other ministers did not know quite where to look. Then there was a buzz of excitement in the hall as Raman pushed his way to the front, saying, make way, let me through." Raman stepped onto the stage and bowed to the king. "Your Majesty," he said, "with your permission, I would like to take up the challenge. I have better tricks up my sleeve than he could ever dream of." The king was encouraged by Raman's words. Nobody else has stepped forward, so this brave soul must have some good trick to perform. Otherwise, the king and his kingdom would be laughed at forevermore. "Please continue, young man," said the king. "I first need something for the trick, Your Majesty, so I would like to ask one of your servants to fetch something for me." "Go ahead, but be quick about it. We haven't got all day," replied the king. Raman whispered in the ear of one of the attendants, and the man trotted off. While the crowd watched and waited, Raman paced up and down the stage. "Who are you and where are you from?" asked the king. "I am Raman from a small village called Tenali," replied Raman. "But nobody here, not even Tatachari, your friend and guru, knows or cares where it is." Tatachari turned crimson as all eyes in the hall turned towards him. His further blushes were saved by the arrival of the attendant carrying a small packet. The attendant handed it to Raman. "I am not really a magician, Your Majesty, but a humble poet," said Raman. The king smiled and nodded. "Well, Tenali Raman, your name is known here today, and if you perform a trick that our friend here cannot equal, then you shall be rewarded with a bag of gold. But I must warn you that if you fail, you will get 1,000 lashes for wasting our time." "Certainly, Your Majesty," said Raman, bowing. Raman now addressed the magician. "Sir," he said, "I shall perform a trick with my eyes closed. All you have to do is to perform the same trick with your eyes open." The magician held his belly and laughed loudly. "With my eyes open," he said, "I too shall do any trick that you can do with my eyes closed." "No, I shall do it with my eyes closed. You must agree to do it with your eyes open," replied Raman. All right, replied the magician. "I shall do it with my eyes open, with pleasure." Raman opened the packet that the attendant had brought. He took a handful of the powder that was in it and then closed his eyes. He sprinkled the powder all over his face and eyes. A tissue, Raman sneezed loudly. Then he dusted the powder from his face with his towel and opened his eyes. The audience looked on in amazement. Now it's your turn, said Raman to the magician. But remember, do it with your eyes open. But what is this powder? Asked the magician. It is only a little chili powder, said Raman, smiling broadly. Cheers and applause broke out. The audience fell to the floor with laughter. The king laughed too, and even Thatachari permitted himself a little smile. Excellent, said the king, wiping away his tears. You deserve your reward, and from today you shall be part of my court. I have not laughed so much in ages. You really are a funny fellow. General Raman was delighted. He spent many happy years at the court, and his fame grew from day to day.